Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Chris, and I'm an alcoholic. And I am absolutely delighted to be here, and I want to thank Carl. And man, you did a great job on Coshocton. Let me tell you, I listened to locals butcher that. So the fact that you actually got through it, not even being around here, that's great. I do want to thank you for asking me to come and share here tonight. I'm not quite sure how I got here, but here I am. And I am grateful for each and every face that I see on here tonight. In light of our current circumstances and everything that's going on, I am so thrilled with how our fellowship has shown up and kept the message going and kept the rooms open and kept recovery. And to see a couple of the houses even on here tonight, that's absolutely fantastic. And I know that without a doubt that all of you don't keep me sober, because I tried that. I tried meeting-based sobriety to keep me sober, and it didn't go so well. But what being with all of you tonight, and what it does is it keeps me deeply rooted in the design for living that contains a set of spiritual disciplines that got me connected with a higher power that got me sober. And our book talks about how it's a design for living that works in rough going. And so I stay connected with all of you. I stay connected with the steps, and I stay connected with my higher power. And I'm amazed at how I can get through even a crazy time like this. And I live by a hard, fast rule that when my alcoholism takes a day off, so will I. And that hasn't happened yet. So here I am. And a woman that lived the way that I lived, that did the things that I did, I got to tell you, she doesn't get invited anywhere. She doesn't get invited on a Zoom meeting even, because when I'm in the throes of my illness, when I'm in the throes of my disease, people aren't inviting me places. They're not asking me to come places. And a time like this would have happened, and I probably would have disappeared into my illness, and nobody would have been looking for me. Because when was out there ripping and roaring and running and gunning and doing my deal, when I disappeared, nobody was going, "Oh my gosh, where's Chris? We have to find Chris. What could have possibly happened?" They were always saying things like, "Thank God that's over. Thank God she can't hurt us anymore. Thank God she can't hurt our children. Thank God she can't tear our families apart." Because in my illness, those are the kind of things that I do. And where I always expected to wind up, and where I would have wound up at a time like this, was in an unmarked grave somewhere. And absolutely nobody would have been looking for me. But instead of winding up there, I'm at a meeting in Covina, California on a Tuesday night, I think it is, and I get to see some people that I've met before, and I get to see my great friend Debbie, and I just want to give a big shout out to Amot recording. An AA tape saved my life at one point in my sobriety, so I do not take lightly what they do. And I have an incredible and deep level of reverence for the message that they carry. And they have been instrumental during all of this in keeping the message going. And it has blown my mind with the work that they have done. So I just want to thank them right now, right up front, so that doesn't go by without it. But instead of winding up in that unmarked grave, I was blessed with a seat in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous on October 29th of 1994 by a higher power that I didn't even believe in. And I would love to tell you that I walked in the doors of AA, I did everything that you suggested, and I skipped through my recovery happy, joyous, and free. But that's absolutely not the truth of my story. I want to sit here and tell you that I'm the crown princess of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that, I can put on my little tiara and my little sash that, says Little Miss AA, and I'm going to impress you. And I want to tell you, I walked in and I was the girl that, got the Maserati and the mansion and the $1 million, but that's just not the truth of who and what I am. Because my story, in its most raw and honest form, bears witness to the absolute fact, not a belief, not an idea, but an absolute fact that the only ones dying of untreated alcoholism are not just the people that are still out on the streets tonight in Covina, California. It's not even the people that maybe this may be their first night in one of those houses, you know, and I really honor you guys for showing up. It can be the person in AA that's got 5, 10, 15, 20 years away from their last drink. And that is part of my story. There has never been a point in the last 25 years that I was unwilling to stay happy, joyous, and free. But there have been many times where I was incapable because I didn't have the necessary power. I wasn't plugged into the necessary power that allows that to happen for an alcoholic of my type. And the truth of my story is that there were times where I have stayed sober on fierce grace alone. And, you know, if you know anything about long-term sobriety, if you're an alcoholic of my type, you probably know what I'm talking about. And, you know, grace is a beautiful thing. And it's, you know, and it just, you picture, you know, that skies parting and everything beautiful happening and this unearned merit. And fierce grace is when you got one arm behind your back and your face down on the floor in the mud and you're screaming uncle, but you don't drink. But what I do want to tell you, so I don't forget, is you don't have to live that way. You don't have to go there. You don't have to do that. AA has always worked for me. I haven't always worked for AA. And there's a big difference. And I know that now. And I truly know at a level deeper than ever in my life that all I have is a daily reprieve based on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. And that maintenance of my spiritual condition takes a number of things for me to do. But that's why I'm here tonight. And that's why I do a lot of the meetings I do in my area that are on Zoom. And that's why we keep a lot of the different groups going, and I have to keep my own personal spiritual practice because I'm that type of alcoholic that if I don't stay deeply rooted in the spiritual disciplines, I will start getting restless, irritable, and discontent, and my sobriety will become unbearable. And I have no doubt after 25 years sober that I am capable of drinking again if I get too uncomfortable. Because alcoholism, it's all I've ever known. My family legend states that my alcoholism reared its ugly head when I was 4 years old. Obviously, I wasn't a daily drinker at that time, but my parents gave my brother and I both a glass of cold duck champagne to knock us out on Christmas Eve. And my brother was 4 years older than me. He drank his down, went into bed, and dreamt of sugar plums all night long. And my family legend states that little Christy, me, appeared in the doorway that night approximately 17 times asking for more juice. So, you know, was I born an alcoholic? Did I become one? I don't know. And does it really matter? But all I know is that that one drink did something to me, even at 4 years old. Obviously, I didn't become a daily drinker then, but I started drinking at about 11, 12 years old. And then by the time I was 15, I am running out of bars down on Ohio State campus that are being rated for underage drinking, because those are the places that I hang out in. I'm ripping and roaring through people's lives already. When I'm 17, I wrote and had produced a public service campaign for PBS television here in Ohio. And I was the youngest person that had ever done that in Ohio. And because of that, I was given this amazing opportunity to go intern at an advertising agency as soon as I graduated from high school, and my entire future was going to be set. And I would have came right out of the gate at 17 years old, and everything would have been a life of my dreams. But there was a problem with that internship, and that was that it was unpaid. And so I told him no thanks. So at 17 years old, I turned down the greatest opportunity I could have had, and I went back working at the local discount store, rearranging plastic shoes for, I think, $2 an hour. Because I already knew at that point I needed to have money to get what I needed to get, because I couldn't deal with, I never had a problem with drinking. I mean, other people had a problem with my drinking because I was that girl that I drank, I got drunk, I threw up, I drank, I got drunk, I got locked up, I drank, I got drunk. I was always in trouble, but I didn't have a problem with any of that. The only problem that I had with alcohol is that it wore off, because when alcohol wore off, all that insane madness in my head would start again. So I was willing to do whatever I needed to do to get whatever it was I needed to get. I had an opportunity at 18 to go to law school. My cousin was a corporate attorney for Cincinnati Reds and Boeing Aircraft. And he said, well, Chris, the way you love to argue, why don't you come down to Cincinnati? You'd make a great attorney. And we had talked about law, and I was passionate about it. And, I never made it to law school because we found out very quickly I was a lot better at breaking the law in Cincinnati than I was studying it. And they asked me to leave. And that's what I do with opportunities that are literally handed to me on a silver platter. And so by this time, I'm working in this hotel in downtown Columbus, and I am working all day, and then I'm drinking in the hotel bar at night, and then I'm passing out in one of the hotel rooms. And the next day, I still can't make it to work on time because that's the alcoholic that I am. I can even be right there. I'm in my 20s, and I'm getting hospitalized multiple times for alcohol poisoning. And, I didn't realize how odd that was until I worked with a beautiful young lady, and she's never been drunk. She's 40 years old. She's never been drunk. She's, she married her high school sweetheart. They have these 3 wonderful children and all that stuff. And she's really funny because she kind of lives through me sometimes, and she'll be like, Chris, tell me a story, And I'm like, and one time I said to her, I said, well, I was, I've been hospitalized multiple times for alcohol poisoning. She goes, multiple times? Why wouldn't you just stop after the first time? And that's how people look at us. They cannot understand why we just don't stop after the first time. But I'm the girl that comes out of blackouts and full-on restraints. I burn down every relationship that I ever had. I tell you I love you one minute, and I come out of a blackout with a knife against your throat the next minute. And I don't know what happened because I have that personality change that our big book talks about. And I just never know who's going to show up. I can be happy, fun, good time Chris. And then I take that next drink and something shifts in me. And I'm off, and I'm running, and I'm restless, and I'm irritable, I'm angry, and I'm violent, and I'm bitter, and I'm just, all these things happen, and I have absolutely no power, choice, and control over them. And it's not the fact that I'm doing these specific things is what makes me alcoholic. It's the fact that I vow over and over again, I'm never going to do them again. And I find that the minute I put alcohol into my system, it kicks off this craving that I have that I don't even know I have, and I'm off and running again. I've never been unwilling to not get in trouble. I've never been unwilling to not hurt other people, but I've definitely been incapable over the years. And like I said, I burned down everything around me between the ages of 11 and 33 when I got in here to all of you. I basically surrendered all of my hopes and dreams for a drink. There were times where I thought the right relationship would fix me, and, I'm really not sure where I got that idea. I'd never been in a good relationship. I never even witnessed a healthy relationship because you shake my family tree and bottles fall out, not happy marriages. But by the time I got to all of you, I'd been married and divorced 3 times. And the last guy that I married was a very successful businessman. I met him the day after I had been hospitalized. It was March 18th, which is the day after one of the high holy days for alcoholics, the day after St. Patrick's Day. And I apparently had taken a dive out of a moving vehicle and had busted my head wide open, and AMA'd myself out of the hospital and went on, got bangs cut so you couldn't see my head wound, and went on to a job interview. And that's how I met my next ex-husband. So, that's what I do. I take advantage of opportunities, but then I just don't have a lot of follow through. And I tried to be a really, really good wife. I tried to be a really good person. And, I used to say all the time, and I hear it in AA where we talk about, when we know better, we'll do better. And the truth was, I knew better. I had watched TV. I had seen stories of how normal people act. And I would try so hard, and I knew better. But no matter how much I knew, oh, I shouldn't do this or I shouldn't do that, once I got alcohol into my system, it was all bets were off. And I had lost that power of choice, and I didn't even know that. And there was one particular business cocktail party that I went to, and I'm full of self-centered fear and self-pity. I'm living under that illusion that I can drink like a normal person. And I go in, and I've got this little plastic cup in my hand that they've given me, and I'm full of self-centered fear and self-pity. And I just take it, I like crush it in my hand because I can't sip and socialize like a normal person. And liquor runs down my arm. And that's when I learned that it's socially unacceptable at a business cocktail party when liquor runs down your arm and you go and lick it off. And those were the kind of things that I would do. And my husband, who is this highfalutin businessman, his face turns bright red, and that vein that you men have in your forehead that is right here, that we women can make appear on a moment's notice. It was like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. It was like bam, 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 bam. I could see his heart beating in his head. And I said my first ever sincere prayer right then. And it was, dear God, please let his head blow off because I don't know how to get out of this. And that was the spiritual toolkit I brought to all of you when I walked in. That was the best I had, was God make his head explode. But, I went home from this business cocktail party, and needless to say, never got invited to another one. But I got home and I'm like, okay, I got the hymn, I got the house, I got the stuff. What could possibly be missing? What's wrong with me? And all I could come up with was a child. So that's exactly what I did, was I got pregnant on purpose to fix what was broken inside of me. And I promised that child the entire time I was pregnant that he was going to grow up in this loving, beautiful home. Because you see, I hadn't. My mom died from the DTs when I was 4 years sober. I had watched the disease of alcoholism just ravage an entire family. And I promised this child over and over and over again I wouldn't do that. And I'm struggling through this pregnancy because I'm trying not to drink. And I can't figure out why I'm just getting crazier and crazier and crazier. I understand now I'm the real alcoholic. And that if you just try and remove alcohol from me and don't give me a sufficient substitute, I look like every mental illness out there. And that's not to say that there aren't mental illnesses. So please don't hear what I'm not saying. There are. I have a dear, dear sponsee who I have her permission to share this. She is absolutely has bipolar disorder, a real bipolar disorder. And when she's off her medicine, I was looking down the barrel of a gun one night at her house when her children called me for help. So I do understand those things happen, but that wasn't my story. Mine was just trying to take alcohol out of my system without a sufficient substitute. And then sobriety, as I said, becomes unbearable, and I drink again. And that's what happens. I bring this little boy home. I promise him I am never going to drink. They laid him in my arms at the hospital, and I had this moment of panic that said, oh my gosh, baby's shoulders are too tiny to carry the disease of alcoholism on, much less a program of recovery. And I didn't know what I was going to do. So I went home and I just kept trying and trying and trying. And the best that I can do without all of you and a program of action is I got myself locked up in a psychiatric unit under a suicide watch with papers that said I was a threat to myself and all of society, including that little boy I brought into this world to fix me. That's why you mean so much to me. Without you, that is the best that I do. I eventually got released into my husband's care. He couldn't take living with me, and he left. And I climbed right back into the bottle. And I can't tell you if I had a conscious thought or not whether to drink, but if I would have, it would have been something like, see, I wasn't drinking and he still left. Obviously, alcohol's not the problem. He was. Because when I'm drinking, I'm a chronic victim. It is never my fault. It is always yours. And so I started ripping and roaring through the disease of alcoholism. And now I'm dragging this little boy through the disease with me. And I'm leaving him places that he shouldn't be left with. And I'm starting out in my home bar here in Coshocton, Ohio, and I'm coming out of blackouts down on Ohio State campus, surrounded by guns and knives and weapons, and I'm really not sure where I've left my son. And what happened to me was one day I was walking down one of our main streets in my town, and there was a guy, and he handed me his business card. And on the front of it had his name and phone number, and on the back it had the crisis hotline. And he said, Chris, I've been watching you. He said, I'm watching your eyes turn yellow, your skin turn gray, and you're about 30 pounds heavier. You're bloated up from chronic alcoholism. He said, if you ever want some help, we can help you. And I took that business card and my alcoholic arrogance, threw it on my kitchen counter at home. And the day finally came. I had gone to a beer wine stop. I had been just tearing through lives again. And, you know, there are days that I'm coming home and I don't have enough money to feed my disease or feed my child. And the truth is, my little boy's going to bed hungry night after night. He has bruises all over his body from me trying to take him upstairs to his bedroom. And I'm so drunk, I'm falling back down the steps. And the day came where I went out in the morning and I came back and I thought I couldn't remember if I brought my son back home with me. And so I go running through the house and I'm screaming and I'm yelling and I'm cussing and I'm breaking furniture and I'm carrying on. And I get out to the living room and there he sat and he looked up at me. He's playing with little Hot Wheels and he looks right back down and just keeps playing. And it wasn't a look of terror on my son's face that hit me right in my soul. It wasn't the bruises on his body or the fact that some of his ribs were showing. It was the fact that I had a sudden moment where I realized my son was being raised just like I was, and the unacceptable was acceptable and the abnormal was normal. He was completely unaffected by my behavior. And I was full of guilt, shame, and remorse in that moment. And when I was full of guilt, shame, and remorse, I didn't pick up the phone. I picked up the bottle. And so I turned to the fridge, and when I did, I saw that business card sitting on the kitchen counter. And I looked at that business card in the fridge and my son, and the business card, the fridge, and my son, the business card, the fridge, and my son. And it felt like it went on for hours, and it was probably just moments. But I was at that jumping off point where I couldn't imagine a life with or without alcohol. And so I didn't know what you had to offer. So I opened the fridge, pulled a beer out, chugged half of it down, and that business card caught the corner of my eye again. And I picked up the phone and I called the number on it. And I said, Jerry, this is Chris, and I think I need some help. And that's why when anyone walks into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in my hometown smelling of alcohol, I don't tell them to come back when they haven't been drinking. Because I know that it may have been that half a beer that they drank before the meeting that gave them the courage to walk into all of us and to ask for help. It's my job not to shoot the wounded, but to help. I've been given the power to help heal. That's my job. And so I asked him to come sit with me. And if you're being all disruptive and crazy, then I'm going to grab somebody else and we're going to take you outside and we're going to get you the help you need, if it's detox or whatever it is. But I walked into that first meeting and I absolutely loved what I saw. And it wasn't that you were all happy, joyous, and free. It was that there was about 30 people in the room and they all appeared to be men. I was shopping for my next ex-husband at my first AA meeting. And the truth is I got him. But that's another story for another time. And then I saw her. And there was this little old lady sitting up in the front row, but she appeared to be 112 years old. So I wrote her off as competition. And all of a sudden she jumped up and came running up to me and said, hi, I'm Mary Kay and I'll be your sponsor. And I didn't know what that was, but I was afraid to ask. And then she started talking about being powerless. And I thought to myself, but I didn't say it out loud. I thought, I can't be powerless. When you're powerless, you're weak. And when you're weak, you're praying. When you're prey, they got you. And I can't do that. And then she started talking about this God thing. And I thought to myself, I can't believe in things I can't see. I'm glad it's working for you, you little old lady. No wonder it's working for you. You have nothing else to do. And then she's talking about this program. And I didn't know what she was talking about, but I just pretended like I did. I took fake it till you make it to an art form. And I became a spiritual parasite. Whatever you would say to me, I would like memorize it and then I'd spit it back at you at the next meeting. I didn't have any understanding that I had a disease that is so deadly that I can't just have this idea, a belief, or even a faith in God. It requires me to have this direct spiritual experience with a higher power. And what happened to me was 4 years away from my last drink. I found myself on a bedroom floor wrapped in a purple robe, soaked in my own sweat, shaken worse than I had ever shook, with a handgun ready to eat a bullet. Because you see, an alcoholic of my type without a sufficient substitute, we're either going to drink again, or many of us take our own lives. And that was the point that I was at. And right in that moment, the phone rang, and I do believe that was an act of divine providence. And the fact that I answered it is nothing short of a miracle. I've got a handgun in one hand, and I answer the phone with the other, and I answer the phone, hello, like nothing's going on. And that guy that had given me that business card, it was him on the other line again. He said, Chris, I noticed you've been missing from a few meetings, and I'm calling to see if you're okay. You see, he didn't believe what I used to say in AA of, hey, if you want what we have, you'll find us. He noticed I was missing, and he reached out. And right then I wanted to say, yeah, I'm fine, I'm great, I'm wonderful. Because like I said, I want you to think I'm little Miss AA. And then right then this thought came into my head, and it was line from a book, Dante's Inferno, that I had read years before, back when I was in high school. And it said, the hottest place in hell is reserved for those who in times of crisis choose to sit on the fence. And I realized I had been a fence sitter in the rooms of AA for 4 years. I was out of ideas, I was out of choices, and I was out of my own little plans and designs. And I said, Jerry, I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm not okay. I don't know what I believe. I don't know if I believe. All I know is that I'm falling apart, and I've got a gun, and I don't know what to do. And he said, Chris, he said, there's people on their way right now. And so there was a woman, and the one woman in particular drove to my house from 40 miles away. And she picked me up, and she said, I'm taking you back to my home group, and you're going to get real, and you're going to get honest. And we drove another 40 miles back the other way. You see, I live in a real small town in Ohio. There weren't other people around doing this deal. And I walked into my first ever big book study meeting, and it was full of women. And they started talking to me about what they had done. And they shared exactly what they had done in the book with me. And I brought it back home to my little hometown after that meeting. And there were 3 other women in my town at that time, all with less time than I had, dying of untreated alcoholism in the rooms, just staying miserably dry on meeting-based sobriety. And I said, these ladies say if we do what they did, we can have what they have. And you guys, they were all happy. And so what we would start doing is, me and these other women, we got together once a week for 2, 3, 4 hours at a time at each other's house. And it was crazy. We had kids running everywhere, but we did one thing right. We prayed to a God that none of us really believed in before we would start. And when that book asked us a question, we answered it to each other. When it told us to pray, we prayed. When it told us to write, we wrote. When it told us to share, we shared. We took every single action that was outlined in the first 164 pages. And we were the biggest bucket of sick you ever laid eyes on. There was literally a fist fight in my driveway between 2 women one night over what it said in the book. So we were not healthy doing this. But what I've learned is that when willingness and action come together, God's grace literally erupts. Because that was 21 years ago. And 3 out of the 4 of us have maintained continuous sobriety since that time. And God had other plans. He sent one of them to Florida, and he sent one of them to Tennessee. But it gave me a message to start carrying. And I didn't know what I was doing, so I was doing a lot of 12 stomping instead of 12 stepping, because what had happened to me, is I got lit up by that book. But then I started getting real bored, and I started, it just wasn't so great. And I'm like, whatever. And then what happened was there was a man who brought a big book study to a neighboring town about 20 miles away. And I started going to this, and it was this Fellowship of the Spirit style big book study. I had never heard some of this stuff before. And I fell in love with this big book and the program, and I fell in love with all of you, and I fell in love with him. And my life like lit up, and I was just off and running. And there was nothing at that time I wouldn't do for AA. And I'm running around 7 days a week, and I'm going to this and I'm going to that, and I'm sharing here, and I'm sponsoring 8 million people, and I'm speaking at things. And I am so lit up. But then all of a sudden, it's like a few years later, I start feeling stuff unraveling and I can't understand. And I'm literally having conversations that sound like this. God, can you not see everything I'm doing for AA? How can I be feeling this way again? Don't you see all the people I'm helping? Don't you see all the, and I start circling the drain, and I'm starting to get in collision with everybody and everything around me. And I've applied for, interviewed, and got a job that I am in no way qualified for. I'm a high school graduate, and all of a sudden I find myself running a nonprofit botanical garden, and I can't tell you the difference between a daisy and a dandelion, but I interview well because I'm an alcoholic, and I can feed you a massive line of stuff that makes you believe I know exactly what I'm doing. So I'm showing up on a job every day, living a lie. I'm in collision with everybody and everything around me. And I can't understand. I've got the perfect man now. I've got the perfect job. I bought a little house in sobriety because of all of you. And I make this decision. I make it that says, oh my gosh, Chris, you just need more God. It just must be an 11th step problem. That's what you need to do. So I start taking all of these various spiritual practices, and they're all very beautiful practices. And I had some spiritual experiences before. I had one time when I was out hiking in the woods. My home had burned down when I was 7 years sober, and I thought it was the worst thing that could have ever happened. And it wound up being one of the biggest gifts wrapped in sorrow I've had almost to date, because I was out in the woods one day and I heard this knocking sound. I'm like, oh my God, what is that? What is that? And I was stomping around in the woods, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I don't know if I thought it was the attacker letting me know he was coming to get me. I don't know what my head was saying, but all of a sudden I hear it again. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to stop. I got to stop. And so I stopped, and I got real still, and I got real quiet, and I hear this. And all of a sudden I have this spiritual awakening that says, it's a woodpecker. And the reason it was an awakening is because I did exactly what all of you had taught me to do. You taught me, if I just attempted to get still and to get quiet, I could know what things are. And I had this awakening right then that this woodpecker was like this God that you guys had tried to teach me about. I got still and I got quiet, and I knew who and what he was. But just knowing who and what he is isn't enough. I want to see the woodpecker. Truth is, I want to pet the woodpecker. So I start walking around trying to figure out where he is, and then it happens again that fast. I have this other massive spiritual awakening because I realize I can't see him, but what I can see is all the holes he's drilled in the tree. And I have this awakening that says, Chris, this woodpecker is like that God they've been trying to teach you about. You may not be able to actually see him, but if you just look around, you can see where he's left his mark. And I had such an opening at that time, and my spiritual life had taken off, so I couldn't understand why things weren't going the way I thought they should be going at this point in my recovery. At this time, I'm almost 17 years sober, and so I start taking all of these spiritual trainings, and every single one of them was absolutely beautiful, and every single one of them would work until I would leave my house and try and deal with humanity. They were all beautiful while I was sitting on my little cushion, chanting Om. And the truth is, the allure of burning incense and buying Buddha statues from TJ Maxx, was a lot more attractive to me at that point than telling all of you the kind of pain that I was in, because I had this persona that said I had it all together and I was little Miss AA. And the truth is what happened to me after taking all these trainings at 17 years sober, I became physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and financially bankrupt. I spent 100% of my life savings on these spiritual trainings. and couldn't understand why they didn't work. And I got to tell you, you didn't have to convince me that I had a problem. You had to convince me that I didn't have a solution, because I just kept trying and trying. And what happened was that man that I fell in love with, that had done the big book study, he came in one day, and I was not pleasant to live with, because when I'm not spiritually fit, my character defects rule my life. And I am like that little guy that used to be on the Verizon commercial. I'm 2 feet behind you going, can you hear me now? 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 Because I am demanding that you fix what is broken inside of me. And I run people out of my life doing that, because I have this faulty emotional dependency that demands you fix what this empty, gaping wound inside of me. And this one day he came and he had this set of CDs. We'll pretend these are a set of CDs. And he went to hand it to me. You know, like you hand a dog a bone that you don't know whether it's going to bite you or not. He was like, I think you might want to listen to these. And I grabbed him out of his hand. I'm like, why do you think that? And he's like, well, there's a lady on there. It really might help. And I threw him on the counter just like I had done that business card. Because when I am driven by self and I am running the show, I don't believe there's help out there for me. I believe that I am different and I am beyond help. And what happened was, the day came, I was miserable enough. I was just angry enough. And I saw those CDs sitting there and I jammed one of them in the CD player. And this woman came on, and her name is Katie Parker, and she lives in Austin, Texas. And she said, hi, my name is Katie. And she went on to talk about being 17 years sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, dying of untreated alcoholism. That day, I was 17 years sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, dying. And what she did was she talked about how the reemergence of self will happen if you're not living in all the spiritual disciplines in Alcoholics Anonymous. She talked about how the reemergence of self will show up, and then it'll look like those bedevilments on page 52, where you can't make a living and you're prey to misery and depression, and you're just, and all of those things were happening to me, and I couldn't control my emotional nature. And so she gave me this sufficient first step experience for somebody with long-term sobriety that was absolutely miserable. And then what she did is she didn't leave me there. She started talking about the third step and the 10th step in ways that I swear I had never heard before. And I mean, there's no magic in it. It's in the book, everything she was talking about, but somehow I had never heard it. And I had this moment where I woke up to the fact that it had cost me my life savings. And I didn't have 11th step. What I had was a third step issue. I didn't need more God. I needed less Chris. My alcoholic self had reemerged and was running every area of my life. I was still gratefully handing to my higher power the drinking part of alcoholism, because he had seemed to do a great job with that. But I had taken the reins back in my family, my finances, my health, my job, my everything. And I was trying to run the show one more time. And what I had a third step issue that was disguised as an 11th step problem that was hiding beautifully behind a massive amount of 12th step work that was masking a level of unmanageability that I had never known. And here I was at 17 years away from my last drink, back on step one, shaking my head completely. I just couldn't figure out what I had done. And what happened was I stalker called Katie. We are better than the FBI. Within about 30 seconds, I got on the horn and I was able to get her home phone number, her cell phone number, her husband's cell phone number. And for the next 7 days, I literally stalker called her. And the first day it was like, hi, Katie, this is Chris, and I could really use some help. I'm from Ohio. I'd like to talk to you. And probably on about day 3 or 4 of me calling, I was like, hi, Katie, this is Chris again. I would really like a phone call, and I'm getting just nastier. And I'm like, see, she's not who she says she is. She's not carrying the message. She's just another line of stuff. And, she just, wow, and I'm making up all these stories about her, but it doesn't stop me from calling her because now I'm going to tell her how I feel about her, right? And so I keep calling her. And on day 8, my phone rings and it's her name comes up. And she's like, "Hi, Chris, this is Katie from Austin, Texas. And honey, I got all your calls. And I've been out of the country and haven't had cell service in 7 days." And in one sentence, she took all of my resentment, all of the story that I had created. I mean, it looked like a perfect inventory, everything she was affecting, and she turned that entire second column into a lie. And then we started talking, and she told me later, she said, "I knew one of two things from all of your calls." She said, "You were either as desperate as a dying person could be, or you were bat crap crazy." And I figured if I talked to you for a few minutes, I could figure out which one it was. And that's exactly what she did. And what we talked about, and we found out within a matter of seconds that I was living on spiritual awakenings that I had had at 4 years sober, and I had had it 10 years sober. And the truth was, I was at 17 years sober and had not written a fearless and moral inventory in all of those years. And I had done everything in sobriety in those 7 years except for drink. And what I've learned is that grace lasts only as long as ignorance. And she gave me the information that I needed that day, and she became willing to work with me. And she talked about how she was applying the spiritual disciplines of 10, 11, and 12 in every single area of her life, in all those areas that I had taken back and I had developed all these pockets of agnosticism in. And what we did in the next 30 days is we worked all 12 steps, long distance, from Coshocton, Ohio to Austin, Texas. I was willing to do anything she asked me to do. There were times where I took my lunch break at 9:30 in the morning so I could do a piece of inventory with her. There was one time she was flying back in from somewhere, and the only time that she could talk with me was at 11 o'clock Texas time, which is midnight Ohio time. So I went to bed, got a few hours of sleep, set the alarm, got back up, and took my phone call. And what I can tell you is at the end of that 30 days, walking through the steps with her, I got rocketed into that fourth dimension of existence that I thought all of you had just lied about and made up. But for the first time ever at 17 and a half years sober, I was 100% current on my amends. I had done my steps. I had everything set up. And I was lit up with the sunlight of the spirit at a level that just blew my absolute mind. I had that psychic change. I had that complete personality change. And what happened was I was turned into a woman. I didn't say I became a woman or I am a woman. I was turned in by the process of the 12 steps into a woman that is more passionate about serving all of you and serving God than anything else in my life. In fact, I became the woman that I used to hate when I was so miserable in the rooms of AA. Because I walk into a meeting now and I'm like, "Hey, what's happening? I am so happy to be here," and I'm just that crazy lady. And that doesn't mean that I don't have struggles and I don't have problems. But I have a design for living now that promises me, if I just stay close to my higher power and perform his work well through the steps and service, it talks about that if we don't, through work and self-sacrifice for others, we can survive the certain trials and low spots. And that's exactly what has happened to me, because a lot of stuff has happened, in the 8 years since I did all that with Katie. But what I can tell you is I live in the spiritual disciplines at 10, 11, and 12 every single day of my life now. And I don't want to tell you about all the mistakes that I've made. I want to tell you all the great stuff that has happened in AA. But what I've learned is that those mistakes became my lessons. My lessons become my experience. My experience becomes my strength. And if I share that strength with you, either on a Zoom meeting or one-on-one over a cup of coffee, it might just become your hope. And is that not why we're all here tonight? Is just for a little bit more hope. Because you see, through the process of those steps, I found what I was looking for in the bottom of every single bottle. I found this design for living. And I try and carry that message to the sick and suffering alcoholic in any time and in any way that I can. It used to be a problem and it used to be a chore. And I used to be like, I got to go work with somebody. And now it's like, I'm so grateful because I know for a fact that you don't have to wait 17 years sober, whether you're sitting there in your living room, your bedroom, and a halfway house, you don't have to wait that long. There's a message in our book that you can get lit up on tomorrow. And I have sponsees that are 6 months sober that are as lit up as I was at 17 years, and they're out there, they're absolute soldiers for Alcoholics Anonymous, even in the midst of all this craziness that's going on. Now, I have a life now that is beyond my wildest dreams, and it's been that way for the last 8 years. And I don't even know if I deserve this life, but I know what our big book says is that God wants me to be happy, joyous, and free. Now, I don't know if he meant the level of happiness that I have now, but what I do know is that my son deserved the mother that you guys have turned me into. My dad deserved the daughter that you've turned me into. My granddaughters deserve the grandmother you turned me into. My partner deserves the partner that you turned me into. And I am finding myself still living in the age of miracles. And I'm going to share one of those stories with you. And then I'm going to shut up and get off of here on time. But it's a story that it's just one of my favorites. I've got about 1,000 of them. But this one happened just a few years ago. And my son that I told you, I stole everything from him. I stole his security. I stole the money out of his bank accounts. I stole his childhood. But the age of miracles is amongst us because I was allowed to raise him in the rooms of AA. He went to every open meeting with me, and he knows what we do in here. And one day I was in Indiana sharing at a function, and my phone rang, and I hadn't got up and shared yet. And it was about 15 minutes before, and I asked the person at the table, I said, do you mind if I take this call? I said, my son is out in Missouri, and I said, he doesn't call. He's the text generation, so I'm really concerned. And my host said, yeah, go ahead and take it. So I ran over to the corner, I'm like, hello, and he goes, Mama, he said, you're at an AA function this weekend, right? And I'm like, yeah, what's up, buddy? And you see, my son at that time, he was 27 years old. He's a firefighter. He welds on emergency medical helicopters. He's a tough dude. And he goes, Mama, he said, it's the worst flooding we've ever had here in Missouri. He said, the water is up to my ankles. I've already lost 2 pieces of equipment. And Mom, across this just like road that is gone, there is a woman standing there hanging onto her car, and she's holding a baby. And I can't get to them. And I said, buddy, I'm in India. What can I possibly do to help you? What can I do? And he said, Mom, he said, I'm the safety officer. It's my job to get all of my guys home. And they're out there and they can't get places. And I don't know what we're going to do. And I said, honey, one more time, take a breath. What can I possibly do? And he said, well, Mommy, he said, have you talked yet? And I said, no. And he said, when you get up behind that podium, will you please ask your friends to pray for all of us in Missouri? And I said, of course I will, honey. And the last thing he said to me was, Mama, I don't get it one bit, but you drunks have direct connections to God. And he hung up the phone, and I stood there and I shook and I cried, and I got up behind the podium and I did just what he asked. And we all took a moment of silence, and about 300 people in Indiana at 2:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday prayed for people in Missouri. And I got a phone call the very next day. And it was a call that said, I hope you don't mind, but your son broke your anonymity. And there was a gentleman on the other end of the line. I'm like, okay, what do you mean? And he said, I just had to call and thank you. I said, for what? And he said, well, your son mentioned that he talked to you at 2:30 in the afternoon and that you were at an AA function and he had been raised in those rooms and that there was about 300 people praying for us here on the fire department. And I said, okay. And he said, well, ma'am, he said, from 2:30 on, we were able to rescue every single person we went after. We never lost another piece of fire equipment the rest of the night. And ma'am, yes, your son did get that woman and got that baby. In fact, he likened it to walking on water. We don't have answers for what happened, how we were able to save everybody, but he claims it was from the power in those rooms that you go to. So if you get behind a podium at Alcoholics Anonymous, will you please thank your friends for saving lives in Missouri that they didn't even know? And I share that story with you because we never know. When we practice these principles in all of our affairs, we absolutely never know who we're going to touch and what might happen. The age of miracles is still amongst us. And I've tried to give you everything that I had for my living room. It's not as easy as it is to be in front of a group of people where you get energy, but I've tried my best. And so now that I've given you what I have, I'm going to leave you with one request, and that's that 700 miles west of here, there is a little tiny blue-eyed blonde that's 8 years old. Her name is Briley Jane, and it's my granddaughter. And my son's favorite line is, Mama, it's bad enough that she looks just like you, but does she have to act like you? So I am asking you to please keep these rooms open. Please keep the message of Alcoholics Anonymous strong, so that if my granddaughter walks in here, she doesn't have to wait 17 years to find the message that I found when somebody took me through that book and lit me up and rocketed me into the fourth dimension. Thank you so much.